Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Mastu Mahavidishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one nourish us both, protect us both. May we have our study as a vigorous session of study. May we be strengthened by this. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So there's a Vedanta Series question and answer. It's a nice sunny day here in Ireland. And so we begin with questions. I'll mute myself while you formulate and ask your questions.
Pranam Swamiji, Vardhani here. My question is, I've gone back to study the Karma Yoga book by Swami Vivekananda. And I know I've asked this question to you before, but just studying more, I'm trying to understand this concept that, resist not evil. And the example he says is, that statement is applicable only to people who have already attained the condition, in the sense that he gives an example of Gautama Buddha. He was the prince, and when he renunciated everything, that made sense. A beggar cannot renunciate wealth when he doesn't have it. And then he says, when you say resist not evil, only you are a warrior who have fought wars, you can then put your sword down and say, I don't resist evil. But the rest of us probably have to fight. I'm trying to sort of understand that concept. If you could elaborate more, Swamiji. And I know, we discussed about this, and you said, we need to walk towards the sun and not think about the shadow. But are we in that place where we can say we renunciate that, or how do we deal with that?
Okay, so a very good question. I remember Swami Vivekananda, when he was asked, what about turn the other cheek, as had said. He didn't answer immediately. He contemplated a bit and said, yes, turn the other cheek. But if it continues, punch him on the nose. So something of that order anyway. So we have to understand that there are two types of sages, and we see this in the Upanishads as well. The Upanishads are constructed from Brahmins and also Kshatriyas, both. In fact, Swami Vivekananda has this theory, if you will, that the Upanishads were really a kind of revolution against the Brahmanas, in the sense that the priests, the prophets, and the pundits throughout every religion will try to divide things and hang on to ritualism. But it's the prophets and the mystics who will make a revolution and emphasize the internal mystic path. Now, the Bhagavad Gita people have accused the Bhagavad Gita as promoting violence. But we have to understand that this ideal of ahimsa, non-violence, is a very lovely idea, and sometimes for the vast majority of people, impractical. But the violence doesn't take place in the action. The violence is not in the hand. The violence is in the mind. So when we take this lofty ideal of non-injury, it's non-injury in thought, in word and deed. And we can see this very clearly enunciated in the various types of tapas that is laid out in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So what do we mean by resist ye not evil? Because this is actually a biblical statement, resist ye not evil. Some religions will start off with the idea that the world is bad and evil. We can all be tempted by that when we tune into the various news broadcasts available today. All the media is emphasizing bad news. Nobody emphasizes the fact that there's a young man who has walked pretty much the whole world and promoting Gandhi's idea of peace. So if we have a violently orientated mind and yet outwardly we are peaceful, that really is not peace at all. All these various yogas, karma yoga included, the goal is moksha. That's clearly put out in Swami Vivekananda's karma yoga. And so every action that we do is oriented to this freedom. But where are the obstacles to freedom? These are in the mind. And so we have to have a different way of looking at things. So I remember I had given various groups of people a series of actions and interactions and reactions. Normally speaking, if we are in an observing position, we can see how the mind erupts into a wave of reaction. And if that's not controlled, that has dire consequences for everybody. The immediate consequences on me, and that manifests as ill health. There's nothing more powerful than thought. And thought is a creative movement that has its effect in the world around us and produces the world itself. So how will we react in any given situation? We have to learn to react in a measured way. And we have to decide what is the appropriate action that is done. Now, this is in the face of conditioning. All our behavior is learned behavior. And when I say all our behavior, I'm talking of every single species that there is on the planet. How is it that a single cell, as is originally envisaged during abiogenesis or just after it, a single cell struggling a little bit, it at least knows how to take nutrients on board and it knows how to survive. I don't think it's a random process. In the Kathopanishad, the whole idea of a tree is reflected again in the Bhagavad Gita. The whole term vriksha means the thing that can be cut down. So there's a world tree rooted in something. The Kathopanishad can mention this. And maybe we can understand the whole of life and how does a single cell arrive at a whole cooperation, some kind of community agreement where from one single cell, even for in human terms, one zygote, now becomes a whole corporation of different cells with different function and agrees to form a cooperative called the human body. So there must be something inherently inside everything. And when we don't react properly, it's because we fail to notice the withinness of something. We can get to this understanding progressively. And all teachings are step-by-step progressions, starting from what we see as the outside of things. The very sense organs that we use to interpret the world are made from certain waves, creative forces. And ultimately, those creative forces go back to a creative thinker. That means whatever we think will have the creative capacity to change the world around us for good or bad. So if we assess the whole of the world as evil, if we say, I don't believe that God made the world and saw that it was good, it's actually bad. And God made a stupid world. We could have made a better one. Starting off from that position, ignoring that God made the world and saw that it was good, the next question, how is it that we see it as bad? Must be something wrong in our thinking. So we have to learn to adjust thinking, and that means we have to learn to interpret the world. When we have these Vedanta series, what are we investigating? We're investigating the nature of reality. But science is doing the same thing. Religion is doing the same thing, but maybe coming to different conclusions. So the Katha Upanishad will tell us that there's a root of an Ashwatha tree. We have to understand what does the Ashwatha tree mean. It's a very technical term because it means the thing which is not stable, the thing that is not immobile. And the thing that is not mobile is something that changes, and something that changes is something that is assembled from various parts, and something that is assembled will disassemble also. And we have to learn to cut this tree down, we are told, with discernment and detachment, viveka and vairagya. Now, in the midst of all our activities, how will we do that? All our activities come under a classification of karma. But karma is not karma yoga. Karma is just actions. Thought itself is an action. If we don't see things in the right way, we will see them as evil. And if we see them as evil, we'll try to fight against it. But we also have to use our judgment. Otherwise, you see, we can't understand the ignorance which is present in every other human being. Otherwise, we'll become a victim. So certain adjustments have to be made in a measured way. When Vishwamitra came and sought the help of Ram, Lakshmana, and so on to protect the pacifists in the forest, that is the Brahmins in the forest, he took the help of Kshatriyas. And we have to bear in mind that every Brahmin bows down to deities holding military weapons. They're all military people. So we have to be strong. And the greatest strength is control of the mind. And control of the mind is controlling our reactions, using some discernment. You know, those who take the role of teacher, divinely inspired, in a divinely inspired way, is called a guru. They have to use their judgment. Sometimes the judgments are harsh. And those who are dedicated to the guru, understanding that they have this inner reflection of divinity going on, will accept any kind of telling off and any kind of criticism, harsh or otherwise, as a great treasure, because it's an expression of love. So Vishwamitra, he started off as an angry person, but now he's conquered it and become a Brahmajnani. And so he can, having understood indiscriminate anger, something that is one of the great obstacles to clarifying, purifying the mind, he is able to feign it. In the story of Jesus, we see Jesus driving people out of the temple. Was he angry? Did he resist evil? He was resisting evil in a balanced way. Nobody would ever think that Jesus lost his temper and then found it again. There's a funny expression, you know, you lose your temper, yeah, but it's always hanging around. So these reactions are there, starting off as mild frustrations on the basis that we want something. We are told that psychologically, anger comes out of thwarted desire, and it can be very subtle. When we study the Enneagram, we see the subtlety of it. You're protecting your self-image, and when somebody knocks it, it creates an overreaction. And the first victim of your overreaction, whether you know it or not, is your own self. The human body takes the first blow. It has been analyzed by somebody called Louise Hay, and she has put for every physical symptom exhibited in the human body some psychological or emotional cause. For example, supposing I feel irritated all the time, then I may have irritation on my skin, an irritated skin. Supposing I'm fearful all the time, then some other part of the body, maybe the stomach, will get overreactive. If I nurture doubt, then I have a doubting stomach. When I put food in here, digestive system says, I doubt whether this food is good. And you get all the indigestion. Things are not digested well, doubtful nature. So the physical impact echoes every single thought that we have. And the difficulty is we don't think one thought per hour. We think at a rate of maybe one thought per second. And actually it's probably more like one thought per split second. So what happens? See, our behavior is really basically in terms of making a balance, avoiding misery and pain and grief. Many of the Upanishads take this into account and tell us, na shochati is the expression used. So it removes grief. Grief goes. When we think in a certain way and behave, therefore, in a certain way. Well, let me go back to this fundamental formula that I've given off a few times. I might write it on the board if you've forgotten. So the first thing that happens, the first impulse toward any outside event or person, you can't normally avoid it. In that sense, you can't resist anything because habitually we are made to react. Every animal does it. And you might even say every atom does it also. If it wasn't for every atom, with its electron wanting to fly off and not get pulled into the proton, then it maintains the electrical energy and keeps things going. Against the plurality which is there, its duality resists the plurality of the whole universe. The proton doesn't get pulled into other, the electrons and the protons remain separate. There's that duality going on. And because of this separateness, it resists the plurality of the universe, and gravity has its effect on clusters and pulls things in. When we talk about evolution, it's a funny term, but evolution means an unfolding. And you can't just say from biological species. This is an ongoing argument between atheists and theists, creationist theists. And for some unknown funny reason, seeing that there's a creation happening all at once would be a theological position. That's not what we see. What we see is a series of changes. Even in our own life, we see a series of changes from the age of, let's say, 3, 4, to where you are now. And every one of those changes is accompanied by some learning experience. And we pick that up and accumulate it. And that accumulation is registered. We call it samskara, unconscious impressions. We keep that as a kind of reserve bank. So when something impinges on our awareness, a reaction takes place from that level, the habit level. It comes out. Supposing I'm an angry person, why? Well, because maybe when I was 3 years old, maybe somebody stole my toy. And they kept doing it. Then after that, bullying at school. Then after that, something else. So some internal irritation is there. Then when somebody steals my watch, I go berserk. Now the problem is it doesn't help recover my watch. It doesn't do anything. The only thing it does is it gives me a cardiac aneurysm. That's all. Nothing else happens. And it disturbs all my social relationships too. But initially, is it possible to stop it? Since it comes from the habit level, it's my habit and I can't easily stop it. but I can't observe it. I can see it coming up. Now, am I resisting it when it comes up? No. Am I resisting it when I assess it? No, I'm assessing it. I'm reviewing it. So these comes in sets of R's for easy learning. Reaction, number one. Secondly, maybe I can review what happened. Since I'm not part of the mind, since I'm dissimilar from all the senses. So again, that same passage in the Katha Upanishad that talks about the Ashwatha tree, it also talks about the dissimilarity of the senses with the observing element of it. See, Indriyanam, Pratag, Bhavam, knowing the separate origin, the separate nature of the senses, the dissimilarity that also originates separately, as also their rising and their setting. All the senses arise from somewhere, they set from somewhere. When we drift off into something like a dream, and then a dreamless sleep, all the external senses that arose in the morning, they all set. And then there's a different set of impressions taking place. They call it dream. And then at some stage, all that sets again and rises again in the morning, and so goes on in a rotation. But the point is that I'm not the senses, I'm not the mind. If I know that, I'm able to stand back and assess what happened, what went on, what came up, and what happened. Maybe I can say, when I was 3, somebody stole my toys, that's why it's like that. Never mind. Having reviewed it, like a reviewing officer, reviewing all the troops marching by, I can then decide what's a better way. Can I see things in a different way? Can I see what we call God progressively in progressive steps in the other person or the other place or the other event? And if I can see that, what will my reaction be? Instead of seeing an annoying person in the front, I might see the Lord of the universe standing there. In which case, worship takes place. Am I resisting any evil? No. But of course, supposing the person is a robber and stole my watch, then what will I do? Will I just let him go? Or will I assert myself? I can assert myself just as a way of dealing with something. That's my decision. Taken from my revaluation, I can then decide what is the action I should take. But all those reactions will be recultivated reactions on the habit level. Because the more I rehearse a better way of dealing with things and thinking with things, the more that becomes my settled habit. The more it becomes my bank balance, my inner bank balance. And my expenditure then becomes properly done. Here at the area of Vedanta Society, I'm in the unfortunate position of being a treasurer. Not by choice, just by circumstance. So I have to weigh up where should expenditure go, because it's public money. I can't waste it. So a decision has to be done, an arbitration, a judgment, like going to a court. And you hear the arguments from this side, you hear the arguments from that side, and you see the merits here, you see the merits there, you weigh it up, and you make an informed judgment. Now you may ask, that's all very well. It sounds like a long and lengthy process. It sounds like this is going to take some days. Well, not really, because when you structurally and systematically steer your attention and understand your attention is just a culmination of the same forces that produce the eyes and the ears and the skin, that produces dimensions of the mind. And you can trace this back. So even in that passage from the Katha Upanishad, it doesn't end there, because then it gives us, okay, there is a rank and file in the universe, in the cosmos. The mind is superior to the senses. First of all, the senses. These are dissimilar from me as a witness, the true self, the Atman. And then what are the senses made from? The same materials as the things, the objects I'm reacting to. They're the same wave things going on, no different. So in daily activities, we can find things which are attractive. The eyes bring in beautiful pictures. The ears bring us beautiful praise and flattery, maybe. And then we're happy. And so this attracts us, and we want to secure these in a larger measure. That's normally our strategy. But the senses are the sense objects in front of us that we call the world as such are registered with sense organs, and they're the same material. They're nothing different. The eyes that developed from yesterday's soup and whatever, soup and donuts or whatever it was, those eyes today are just a transformed material with a certain intelligence behind knowing how to transform these things in a functionally useful way. But consciousness, which is our birthright, what happens? Our natural birthright flows. And this flows all the time. It flows second by second. So we find that thought flows, attention flows, thinking flows. But what happens to it? Instead of it going outward to create a frustration for me, why can't I divert it inside? As soon as I do that, all that difficulty, unhappiness, that negative reaction, all goes away. There's a stability for it, but it requires me doing it in a systematic, scientific process. I can withhold my hand from staying inside a pocket. I can take it out and use it elsewhere. We have to learn there to take our attention from a fixed position and steer it somewhere else. And then we find that all that sorrow, all that grief, all that reaction, overreactivity, that's gone. Soon as I withdraw, soon as I register, the senses are dissimilar from me, and the objects made from the same thing are dissimilar from me. So anything that we find in front has got 5 characteristics. There may well be more, but we only know 5 things. 5 sense organs are there, but the same senses are there, made from waves as the objects in front. They're all made from vibrations, subtle vibrations. They're carried all by the nervous system into the brain, and if one section of the brain is dysfunctional or is paralyzed for a moment, then that understanding of the universe is shut off from me. If they're all functioning properly, then I see things, but I have to understand that they're all actually products of consciousness. They're all helpful vibrations that come to me to assist me in this karma yoga, taking me away from mere karma, mere action. And that area where all the vibrations come from, we can call God's will or God's power. His creative power. It produces sounds for the ears. It produces them naturally from an area called Akasha. And Akasha, in variation, becomes all the other things. So this is a fundamental thing that we have to understand. That is why I emphasize time and time again the significance and importance of these subtle vibratory elements, which are nothing more than creative force coming from a creative will. Now, this is not just my idea. It's contained in that very passage that I'm quoting, the Katha Upanishad. By the way, if you want a reference for it, it is the 2nd section, the 3rd subsection, and you can see it 6. Actually begins from 1. That section begins from 1, and 6 comes out here as a very significant statement. Having known the dissimilarity of the senses that originate separately, as also their rising and their setting, the intelligent person doesn't grieve. Why should this all be mentioned? Because the commentator, those who have this Katha Upanishad, and I know by now many of you have because of our Saturday series, you now have at least the 8 Upanishads. Okay. So if you go to that section, you'll see the reason why this has been stated is because there's a commentary that highlights the necessity for it. You may say that there is a root somewhere. You may say that this world is like a tree. You may say that there are components of this tree and so on and so forth. You may say all of this, and you may say you need to know this. Next question is, how can we know this? Number one. And secondly, what's the need? What's the necessity for it? And in the current atmosphere of secular atheism, the root that is described is really, and from a non-dualistic point of view, that root is actually ignorance. That's what produces all the other things. Anyhow, never mind. But beyond that, is there something? Yes, we call this Brahman. But there are school of thought that says, no, there's nothing. Well, if there's nothing, then there's no reason why this should grow and develop and be as it is. So the question is, how is he to be known? What is the need of his knowledge? The need of his knowledge is, just as I mentioned in many passages that have gone before, that it is to do with sorrow, to do with grief. The struggle for happiness on the one side and the mother of fears on the other, called death. So when all that goes away, what remains? What remains is a certain stability, a certain happiness. And so all those passages are similar in the sense that it ends up with na shochati. All that grief is gone. Indriyanam pratak paham udyastama yo chayat. Knowing the separate nature of these senses. And then it goes, pratak utpadyamanam matva dhiro na shochati. That's why. Because we're struggling for happiness was a result of reforming all these different ways of thinking, is to remove all this grief, all unhappiness. A grief is a dramatic word, is associated with death. The greatest grief that you can have, particularly in these times, will be that left, right, and center, we either know of somebody or we hear of somebody, and on a mass scale, we're hearing of thousands of people worldwide who are succumbing to the pandemic and COVID. So there's a kind of atmosphere of a concern about death. There's nothing new. Everybody has been concerned with this. The ancient people were concerned about this. To these modern times, they're concerned about this. So these are separately produced from what? From the basic energy which is there, that is God's will of creative power, and manifesting progressively. Supposing we are able to retrace that as part of our revaluation, what would happen? Na shochati. All that grief will go. So there's a profound practical reason why we are studying all of these things. And then we can make a step-by-step analysis. The physical eyeball sees a field in front of us, and it may be observed to be astute or scratchy, watering one day, alert the next day, refreshed, sometimes tired, maybe from reading, or these days from screen time on your computer, whatever it is. But there's a whole field in front that it's observing. And then the field of all the senses can be presented, say, represented by the eye. And then beyond that, a field to do with objects. But it doesn't stop there. So there's an internal eye which is looking at it. And that internal eye looking at the external eye, looking at the field in front, we can see it's registered by another thing. We're living in a mental world with a certain mentality developed from habit. And when we see that, we can see all the various comings and goings, like looking at the stars through a telescope. You can look also at the telescope, because I'm not the telescope. Looking at things through the mind, what is looking at it? Another observer is there looking at the field in front. Today, the observer effect is a big part of the analysis, scientific analysis of what is reality. These questions of consciousness arise. Consciousness is said to be the hard problem. What is this final consciousness? Behind which we find all these other versions that represent themselves as fields in front, containing a multiplicity of events or a multiplicity of objects. With one single observer. When you go back, what will you find? You'll find that one entity, deemed one without a second. And you can do this progressively. When you do this in a detailed way, systematic way, we call this meditation. And don't forget that in doing this, we'll come to this understanding that there are rising and settings going on. That it is not just a waking phenomena we're looking at. We're also looking at the dream, because when you do away with one field, you're left with another. When you do away with that field, you're left with another one, until you come to an unmanifest. And that manifested, avyakta, that unmanifest is there. Then what is all the rest manifest? How can we represent it? We can do it like a tree. Everything manifests from one thing. But it means that the internal essence, the subtle essence of it, must have been one with it. Now, when we find something outside, so-called outside the senses, seemingly outside, how will we interpret it? What will be our reaction? And will it be accurate? On that basis, we can either resist evil, or we can do whatever is necessary to adjust it. Now, the greatest and easiest way of doing it, of controlling this mind in this way and our reactions, will be to think of the mind like a bee, queen bee. And wherever that goes, everything else will follow. All the other bees will follow. And find a way of thinking that will readjust everything, including our reactions, and decide whether we will react in an adjusting way for the good of society. So we come back now to the Bhagavad Gita. Why is Krishna exhorting violence? Not exhorting violence, he's exhorting a social harmonizing factor. A military person, their spiritual path is military action. A student would be studentship. A mother would be motherly action. A Swami will be talking, maybe, probably forever. All right. But the next life, of course, I might be something different. So where we find ourselves, the environment we find ourselves, we have to all make that karma yoga. We have to make that our spiritual practice. And we have to do it well. The Bhagavad Gita gives us two definitions. What is yoga? Equanimity of mind and skill in action, efficiency. We have to do both of these. But you see, if we are resisting evil on an emotional level and trying to suppress something, there's no psychologist on the planet that will tell you the best way of handling your stress or handling the disturbing elements in the mind will be, please make a suppression, push it down, resist it. Because every action has an equal and opposite reaction, it will come up with a vengeance. Now we have the beautiful system where we can make karma yoga actually karma bhakti yoga. That is, we can do all actions with a sense of sweetness by offering them, the fruits of them at least, to the divine lover, our beloved, to fill the mind in with love of God, to intensify that. In which case, yes, it'd be like facing the sun, walking toward the sun, your shadow follows obediently behind you. If you think of God, let's say 90%, then only 10% will be to do with other things. Minimum requirement, 51%. Saturate the mind, minimum 51% sattva, purity, love of God, put in a simple way. You saturate your mind with that, then you'll see God everywhere. The gopis saw Krishna everywhere because they saturated their mind with Krishna. Everywhere they saw him. And those moments where he was absent, they pined for him. See that? So look at this yearning taking place and pining taking place and all these other aspects of bhakti, para-bhakti actually. So saturating the mind with purity, that's the way. That doesn't mean to say we are foolish. And Ramakrishna gives that beautiful story, isn't it? About the dangerous cobra, the holy man walking through the village. I'm sure you know the story. At the risk of repetition, I'll tell it again in a kind of shortened form. Anyhow, the holy man comes through a village, and he was about to go along a certain path, and the voice of the village or the people of the village said, please don't go along that path. Nobody goes along that path because there's a dangerous cobra and it is vicious and has bitten many people here. The toxic poison is there in it. You may die. And since you're a respected person, we don't want that to happen to you. But you see, he was fearless. Why was he fearless? Because you see, the goal of life can be viewed as abhaya, fearlessness. If you only see oneness there, then nothing, no second to fear. It is only because the universe is diverse. You see some expressions, Taittiriya Upanishad mentions it, Katha Upanishad mentions it. Out of fear, the wind blows. See? Out of fear, fire burns. Out of fear, the whole universe is operating. In other words, because there's a rhythm found in the universe, it's because there's a presence, a kind of governing presence there. Finally, in a funny way, put as they fear. On the basis that if your supervisor goes away, then people will play around. Nothing there to govern. Anyway, so he's a fearless person. He says, never mind. And he also knows how to instruct very well. And he has some mantras that he can teach so that whoever takes the mantra can resist the evil. In this case, biting others. There's a certain viciousness involved in it. No reason. And normally, by the way, snakes will go away. It's only if you're in between the mother's young or something like that, that snakes will be aggressive. In a place called Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, we had an ashram there, and we had some systematic steps down like a ghat. And I was sitting there, and after the meditation, I got up and went away, and some people stood there, mesmerized. They said, did you know that there was a brown cobra that came and crawled across your legs and went off that way? I didn't think they were telling the truth. I had no understanding of it, no knowledge of it. So these snakes generally would be very pacifist. They'll try to run away rather than run toward you. Anyhow, sure enough, as he goes along the pathway, the snake comes out and it's just poised there to attack. Wait. What are you doing? What are you doing attacking people like this? Oh, it's my nature. No. Don't bite anybody. From here on, don't bite anyone. See the harm you're causing people and so on. No reason for it. Taught him some mantras and went off. Some time later came back. Where's my disciple? Couldn't find him anywhere. Walked along the path calling, where are you? Where are you? Nothing. Then inquired from the villagers, where is this snake? Snake? Oh, that, we haven't seen that for a number of weeks now. But I don't know, maybe last time we saw him was here. He went. He said, you see, we never got any threat from him for a long time now. And then he found this snake under a small rock, thin like barbed wire. What happened to you? Half dazed. What happened to you? Oh, you see, I did what you said. I haven't never bit anybody. And so the village boys would take me by the tail and smash me against the rocks, no doubt. You know, it's not their fault. And you said, resist ye not evil. Of course, I'm putting these words in to match the subject matter. And so, you know, and I became a vegetarian. That's why I'm so thin. I no longer eat frogs and things. So I'm mild-mannered now. Oh, foolish snake, says the wise man. I told you not to bite. I said nothing about hissing. So from time to time, we have to hiss. But biting is not literally biting. The bite comes in speech. The bite comes in your thought. The bite is the vicious part of it. So we have to resist that by a structured way, a structured alternative way of thinking. The first R, react. Second R, revalue. Third R, review. Third R, revalue. And fourth, react in a different way. Put a more useful reaction in. Something that has an uplifting effect all around. Let's take words in speech, for example. You take the Bhagavad Gita's version of tapas of speech. How should we speech? Our speech should be sweet. Our speech should elevate, enlighten the other mind. We can extend it. A smile is also a version of communication, speech. We are always talking and we're all listening to ourselves. We're always speaking to ourselves. Even when we're alone, the mind is still carrying out a monologue conversation. It's how we think. Now, what is the train of your thought? There's no clear clue necessarily on the outside. You're looking up like this and thinking something, and nobody knows, has any evidence, what are you thinking? You could be thinking the most harmful things. You could be thinking of putting poison in your neighbor's tea. There are all kinds of things you can be thinking of. So the main thing is this. We have to do what we have to do. Otherwise, there'll be no policeman. Otherwise, there'll be no military. Otherwise, there'll be no discipline in the schools. Imagine. So all of that has to be there. A sensibleness has to be applied. But in terms of controlling the mind, we have two options. One option will be to hit it with a stick. The other option will be to coax it and approach it from the side. Same thing with institutions. You want to make friends with a horse or a dog, don't look at it directly. Look in a different direction. Extend your hand. Allow the dog to sniff a little bit. And then find the fingers massaging the back of the ear and the dog responding. Now it's your friend. Nothing to fear. If you want the dog to attack, look it directly in the eye. And if you want to frighten a horse, look it directly in the eye. The horse is looking at you, is assessing. Is there any danger here? In Zimbabwe, we have baboons. Baboon is a kind of monkey, but they have very sharp incisors. And also they are social animals. They can surround you and they can attack, and they will rip you apart with their teeth if they have the confidence to do it. So that's if you look them in the eye. So experiments have been done. You can have a very vicious baboon sitting behind you. And if you are not concerned, they're not concerned. As soon as you turn around, they start jumping a little bit. And if you look them in the eyes, they will react. And we all react biologically in set ways. So they have the option to run away and look back, wondering what's happening, or run up a tree, something like that. Or if they feel they really have no other option, they may attack you. If you're bigger than them, chances are not. But if you're crouching down, yeah, they'll assess it differently. But are we mere biological creatures like that? Or we have the capacity to stand back and apply our discernment with our so-called superior intellect, using what psychology calls adult script, arbitrating between what we were taught, what came into the unconscious mind when we were small, what we learned there, and on the other side, how we reacted emotionally, and take and arbitrate what will it take usefully from here or there. Those who went on the Enneagram will understand the whole idea of this parent-adult-child relationship. We stand in the adult position and arbitrate well. This is called equilibrium of mind, and the result of it will be skill in action. In other words, karma yoga. See, these passages which are there in scripture are not just to do with dry abstract principles. As I mentioned yesterday at our Upanishad class, 3 things come out from these scriptures. The one thing that comes out is a different way of seeing things. In other words, it lays out a principle concerned with the question of the nature of reality. Secondly, it gives us a how. How do you understand this reality? How do you understand this directly? And thirdly, a meditation that can come from it. These 3 things come out from proper scriptural study. What do we mean by scripture? Scripture is a record, is a proof. Proof means it comes out of direct experience. Can you prove there's a God? Is a question often answered. You can't prove anything. Proof is entirely subjective. Is there evidence? Oh, yeah. And in the passage I just mentioned there, Kathopanishad there, the evidence is the tree itself. So we find something is there. That's the evidence. Because it asks us to see, okay, well, what is the root of it? Will there be a root? So there's a commentary that I can read on that particular passage. The tree of life has its unseen roots in Brahman, the source. The tree, the roots and the branches, they represent Brahman in its manifested form. Well, the tree of life is said to be imperishable Brahman, which uses the illustration, asks us to cut off the tree of existence by the potent weapon of non-attachment. So then there is a certain, commentators will also say, a certain school of thought which will ask, well, maybe there's no root at all. Because if you say the whole thing is, the whole of the tree is in some way an apparition, then we can then, by a sense of some kind of logic, say, well, then there's nothing there. And this would be some schools of thought that might say that and come to a conclusion of nothingness. Now, this is not just an ancient position called nihilism. and is found in some Buddhist schools, for example. But it is also a modern mantra issued by materialists today, who say, look, there doesn't have to be anything behind it. And if there's something behind it, it must be a simple. And as we know, simples are not intelligent. That kind of logic based on there's matter, not understanding. The whole idea of matter was disbanded over 100 years ago. They just haven't caught up with the modern science, verifying what was told thousands of years ago.
So, Swami, I had just one question.
Yes.
Yeah, because I told you I had a question during the week, and I kind of had the answer, but you sort of made me think again. You spoke about the reaction, kind of more our reaction, kind of within ourselves. But when you're around other people, because I read that Holy Mother said that, you know, even to listen to a person speak ill of another person can affect us. And then also if we speak,
affect us, will affect us.
Will affect us. And then if we speak ill of someone, that we can actually take their karma on. And then it was also that if we praise someone, that can also sort of diminish their spirituality in a sense. So I just, obviously in this, we live in the world, and yeah, we have sort of control over our reactions, but you know, I just thinking on a practical level, you know, when you're around people like that and they're speaking ill, you know, well, two questions. Firstly, why does that affect us? Why does that affect our karma? And how would we practically, is that just where we would just keep maybe doing our mantra? Because obviously to get up and leave, you know, it's a little antisocial.
It's a myth to think that the world we live in is the absolute reality. I know that's how we view it. I know that's what we have learned. I know that's intrinsically what the senses report. But philosophy tells us, not philosophy, our practical experience tells us that there are three worlds, not just one. And this very passage, knowing the similarity of the senses. So we have to get used to thinking differently. Now, the positive aspect of that is seeing God in everyone. But we also have to be sensible enough to know that since we are laboring under a malady, as it were, of ignorance, we have to be careful what we associate our mind with, what company we keep. If you ask an alcoholic, please, I know you have stopped drinking alcohol for 3 weeks. So I have some friends I want you to meet, and they're in the pub. Well, naturally, you're walking into the danger zone, isn't it? So practically speaking, if it's possible to avoid certain kinds of company, we will. If it's not possible, and sometimes it's not, then we really have to take extra measures to evaluate the situation properly in a real way, in a world which is not necessarily real. Our problem is we say, oh, well, it's all real. In the real world, practically, this is the language we use, not understanding that this world is on shaky ground in terms of its reality and how the senses and the mind is reporting it, and therefore reacting to it. Things are not what they seem to be. Now, there's a reason why we think in these ways, because this is part of the biological game. Survival doesn't happen without these basic instincts. But man has a capacity to transcend the biological nature. And that is what we call spirituality and spiritual practice. And the stronger it is, the better. So how do we cope with it? We make sure our spiritual practice is strong and strengthened from moment to moment, reinforced. So yes, loving, repeating God's name, what we call japa, doing mantra, is a way. But if we react negatively, it means we're actually seeing the world as it is not as it is. And everything that is registered on the habit level will be as a result of practice. Practice. There are 3 principles that we should be doing. First principle, I'll put it up on the board. First principle is practice. I don't know if you can see the board. Second principle is practice. Third principle is practice. Okay? I hope you get the point.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.